Welcome to Kepler Conversations. I'm Dr. Scott Postma. Kepler is an online marketplace for classical Christian education. We employ the historical university model and leverage the best available technology so that we can empower families by liberating teachers to make a classical liberal arts education available, accessible, and affordable. Well, in today's Kepler Conversation, I'm joined by Kepler teacher, Dr. Karla Memmott. Dr. Memmott is a longtime resident of the Sacramento, California area, where she lives with her husband, Kyle. She homeschooled her children and continues to support homeschooling parents by teaching online and in-person courses. She and her husband are founders of the Acacia Classical Academy, which is a hybrid program supporting homeschool families in our local area. Dr. Memmott earned her doctorate in Humanities from Faulkner University, where her dissertation focused on travel literature in the Western tradition. Welcome, Dr. Memmott.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Well, one of the things that we like to do as we open up these Kepler conversations is to get to know you just a little bit. I know I just gave kind of a brief bio to kind of orient people, but outside of teaching, tell us about Karla Memmott. Who are you? What do you love doing?
I like to do a lot. Obviously, I am a reader, but when I'm not reading, I am outside in my garden, which right now is just bursting with live plants and lots of tomatoes. And then I also enjoy hiking, a lot of outdoor activities. I have grandchildren, so when possible, I love to be playing with my grandchildren, and I'm always ready for a good cup of coffee and a board game, especially Catan.
All right, a Catan player. Well, we missed you at the end of year event. The kids were all, had their board game socials going on. Well, I think that as we look at our teachers or have conversations with our teachers, getting to know you is really essential. As parents are, in a sense, outsourcing this aspect of their education in partnership with you. But that also leads us to consider our own education. And I know that you have, completed the doctorate at Faulkner, and we actually took classes there together. But in my own experience, I came to classical education later in life. I had a public school education, and various teachers I talked to, they've come at this in different ways. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and your background? What was your education like?
My education was very similar to yours. I went to the public school. My undergraduate degree was also through a public university. And I'm not saying that it was, bad, but I don't think it was the depth that I really wanted. And even when I was homeschooling, I wanted to give my children something a little bit different. That was pretty much when I started to become aware of classical education. I used to joke around that I was giving myself the education right along with my kids that I never got. I think the area that really attracted me was a book from Mortimer Adler, was How to Read a Book. Through there, I just started reading more and more of his books, and then became aware of the entire movement of classical education that was sweeping the nation.
Yeah, I hear similar stories from a lot of folks that, staying just a step ahead of our own kids as we're given this education. And they say this in just about any arena that, we as teachers, you learn, the best way to learn something is to have to teach it, right? So we often, we gain a lot through that experience. Well, classical education has been a true godsend in the sense that, from my perspective anyway, it scratched a lot of itches that we had as we were starting schools, and it sounds like that's similar for you.
Exactly.
In your experience now, you and your husband Kyle have founded the Acacia Classical Academy, this hybrid program, and I know you are focused on both online and embodied class, room experience. As well as offering dual enrollment through there and on Kepler. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? What is that like? How can folks, take advantage of what you're offering locally and online through Kepler?
The online through Kepler, I think one of the best things about that is it gives students the opportunity to meet one another and become friends, especially like the way I structure the speech class. The students have a partner and they get to work with one another, edit speeches together. They're each doing their own speeches, but they're giving feedback to one another. And the feedback that I get from the students is that they were kind of assigned a friend that they didn't know that they had. And so it was just a really fun way for them to interact. And it's also a place for them to bounce ideas off of one another. What I have found is that even in classes like speech and rhetoric, when we have the opportunity to start bouncing ideas off of one another, there is just this flourishing of new experiences that people are willing to take chances. And I think that is one of the best things that I enjoy about the online is just having so many people come together who are strangers at the beginning of class, and by the end of class, they've got new friends.
I love that. See, friendships are made, right? It's like, what, you too? And so, yeah, it may not share anything else in common, but it's that thing that you both experience that brings you together in friendships. Are
Exactly.
the classes you teach at Kepler, are they the same classes you're teaching through Acacia, or is that supplemental? How does that relationship work between those two institutions?
Right now, they are separate only because the Acacia students are younger students. We only go up through about the 8th, ninth grade level right now, and the academic level for Kepler is a little bit higher. But what we're doing it with Acacia is coming alongside parents, especially parents who are just learning how to homeschool and they just feel like they need some structure. We provide 2 days a week where they come on to our campus. We give them trained instruction. And then the other part of it is while their students are being instructed, we work with the parents for about an hour just to help them learn. Our experience is that most of us haven't been classically educated, and if we don't help the parents learn how to classically educate, there is a frustration that happens. So we're basically educating 2 generations on something that I think is gonna benefit the next generation as well.
I'm seeing much more of that, what you just described, where parents are saying, we want this classical education for our kids. We kind of know what it looks like, from what we've, read or heard about it, but we don't know how to do it, and
Mhm.
so, educating both at the same time is becoming more and more um, frequent. And so hearing, that you're doing that gives me a lot of hope that we have teachers interested in not just teaching a curriculum, but in teaching individuals a true paideia of discipleship. Can you talk
And
about the course? Oh, go ahead, please. No,
well, I
jump
was
in.
just gonna say one opportunity that you and I are both involved in is coming up at the end of July as well, and that's where we're having the Western Consortium Conference. That is an opportunity for anybody in the Northern California area who wants to learn more about classical education to just come together and network together and become part of a group. So there are a lot of opportunities that we're trying to do to help parents navigate this whole world of classical education and teach their children at the same time.
I'm really glad you brought that up. In July, as Carla mentioned, this Western Consortium, it is hosted so well. It's so well done. The hospitality, the facilities are beautiful. The lectures, the time to get to meet other people, the breakout sessions, it's phenomenal, and it's priced so affordably. The value is it's significant, and I'm not saying that because we're a part of that. I'm saying that because getting to be a part of it means that we get to identify with something that has a real significant value for families. So if you are in the Northern California area, or even Southern Oregon or Nevada, I would highly encourage you to make the day trip if it took that long to be there and experience this conference. It's well worth every dollar that you'll spend. And I'll put a link to the conference so you can learn more about it, speakers, the sessions, and registration. It'll be in the show notes to this session. Thank you for bringing that up, Carla.
You're welcome.
Can you talk a little bit about the courses that you're teaching this fall and what the differences are? How are they related to dual enrollment, and what's really included in these classes? Who should take them?
The class for the fall this year is just the speech and debate class, and this would be for anybody basically about the 10th grade level and above. And it is for those who are interested in learning how to do public speaking, for those who think they know how to do public speaking and they want to learn more, for those who are afraid of public speaking and want to just get some type of a voice to start into that. We do speak pretty much every week, whether it's a short 1-minute introduction or a longer speech. And then toward the end, it's kind of fun. We do a debate. I think our resolution last year was whether or not AI should be accepted as a form of writing assignments. It was a fun debate, and the students seemed to enjoy themselves there. So we move from a very basic speech, and then we gradually get more and more complicated, and then we move into the whole debate. As far as the dual enrollment, it is a dual enrollment course through Colorado Christian University. And so what that means is that there is a supplemental fee for that, but parents who are looking to start earning college credits for their children while the children are still in the high school level have that opportunity. And that's a nice feature. I did this when I homeschooled my children as well, and both of them graduated with about 15 to 18 units, which shaved off about a year of college tuition when they went to their brick and mortar universities.
There's a tremendous savings there. I've written a few things that we put out on why I think dual enrollment is a really good option for a lot of students, saving money, but also getting to be in an institution or get the kind of education that actually you want to pay for. So you're getting the college credit from the regional accredited institution, but you're getting the actual education from a classical Christian context. And I think that's really important because we sometimes don't realize that education and credits, although they're supposed to be, congruent or have some sort of correspondence, don't always have correspondence. You can get credits
Mhm.
without education, and you can get an education without credits. But in this, you get the best of both worlds.
I think also the other benefit that I notice both as a parent and what I see as an educator is that that transition between high school and college can sometimes be a very difficult transition. And I don't know that a lot of people think about transitions in their education, but if you can bridge that gap between high school and the college education with these dual credits, it seems to be a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Successful way to help the students navigate that transition with some scaffolding still from the parents and from an educator with smaller class sizes.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. We see a lot of gap year students taking dual enrollment courses, and one of the things that homeschool families often face is that because their education is far more advanced, a little bit more rigorous, maybe than in a public setting, in many cases, that students can graduate often. So homeschool kids are graduating when they're like 16, and maybe they're not quite ready to go off to college, 16 or 17 years old, and parents aren't really ready for them to make their way out of the world that way. And so having that dual enrollment where they can have that gap year, maybe work some, take online courses that have regional credits, and then be able to make that transition when they're ready. I think that's super
Mhm.
wise.
And the other thing that I experienced again as a homeschooling parent is, they are my children. So I wonder, am I being too easy on them on the grade or if I'm being, too difficult? And for me, what I found is that transition of having somebody else step in and basically give feedback was also very helpful to see like, okay, I have the confidence of knowing now that my children are on target and they're ready for it. So just as a parent and as an educator, I've had both experiences and I enjoyed it. And I think it's a very successful way of transitioning.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. Now, you're teaching another similar course, but this is called Rhetoric 1 in the spring. Can you talk a little bit about that course?
The Rhetoric 1 is offered through Faulkner as a dual and credit or dual and credit class, and that is going to be more writing focused, if you want to think of it more like a composition type course, but we are looking at the standardized rhetorical procedures. It is not a situation where we're reading about rhetoric, but we're actually writing in the rhetorical styles of that. And so that one is reading great work material, discussing it together, discussing the rhetorical strategies of how to compose and write the composition, and then the students actually go ahead and do that.
You use the term rhetoric, and I've used the term rhetoric also. And sometimes parents or a lot of folks think of rhetoric and they're like, oh, that political rhetoric, and rhetoric has this negative connotation to it. Would you talk a little bit about rhetoric? Is it a good thing, a bad thing? What exactly is rhetoric, and how should we discern that from good rhetoric versus bad rhetoric?
Okay, let's just get out Plato. um,
All in Plato, Lewis says, right?
Rhetoric is one of these ideas where I would suggest in some ways that you can say that it's amoral in the sense that in and of itself, it is not good and it is not bad, but it is how the individual and the motive of the individual who is using it is what can give it that negative connotation. We, as human beings, are heavily influenced by the words that we hear. And most words will have an emotional connotation to it, which can be used to manipulate individuals. But rhetoric can also be used to persuade people toward a positive idea. And the idea mostly with rhetoric is this idea of persuading, but using a good argument to persuade. It's not to manipulate somebody to make a decision, and it's not to be deceptive, at least the way I teach it. It's to understand that there is a need for a good, solid argument, and then how you can structure the sentences in a way that communicate the message that you're attempting to get across to the listener. So it's not meant to be manipulative when you're coming from a solid, I guess you cannot separate rhetoric from ethic. You have to have a good sound ethic as well on why you're attempting to learn how to speak. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is Winston Churchill and Adolf Hitler were both great public speakers and knew the gift of rhetoric. One was using it for good, and one was obviously using it for evil.
Yeah, great examples. I think Aristotle says something to the effect that it has to do with the motivation of the one using the tool, like you just explained. So rhetoric being an amoral form of persuasion, but then the moral justice. And then for Plato's part, often referred to the sophists, those who would learn to use speech to manipulate, basically to win an argument versus to get to the truth. And I often think of the sophist as that Better Call Saul guy, whatever, that kind of sleazy ambulance chasing lawyer with the oily comb over that's always gonna get you a check.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so those
And
kind of go ahead.
and
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think like Augustine, looking at Augustine too, because if you read his works early on, he studied rhetoric and he basically taught about how to use it. And then as he has his conversion, there is definitely still the skill that is there. And Paul, if you read his writings too, he says that he is not gifted in speech, and yet the rhetorical devices that he uses in his letters they're just there. So it can be something that is very effectively used for a positive outcome.
Indeed, absolutely. Well, as we kind of wind down a little bit here to the end of our time together, there's a lot of questions I'd love for you to unpack, but maybe you could just leave us with a couple of thoughts or even a single thought, a nugget, an interesting kind of perspective from your courses. Maybe just share with our audience a little bit about what they might be getting, in the classes that you're teaching.
I think When I teach, my heart is to connect the Word of God, with practical things like rhetoric or speech or anything like that. And so there is definitely an intersection that comes across in all of the classes. And when we think of, for example, in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and we have this understanding of the importance of the words that we speak. They have a beauty to them. They have a truth to them, and there is a goodness that I don't think people really take a lot of time to recognize or give an appreciation for. And so my desire in the classes is to slow down and really hear some of the words, that we can just appreciate the beauty of the words that we speak, that we hear, that we write. And I always say that, as people of the word, we need to be people of the word.
I love that. You reminded me as you were just talking about that you have an essay actually coming out in the Consortium Journal in the summer edition here that's going to drop this next month, that defends or champions the idea of getting back to writing in cursive. And I know that's not directly tied to the courses you're teaching, but that isn't a popular view in modern education, where efficiency and utility, seem to prevail. Would you just maybe briefly, before I let you go, would you maybe talk a little bit about that and give us maybe your elevator pitch for why we should keep cursive in our academia?
Sure. There are some very practical reasons of why some people suggest to continue with writing. It has to do with learning how to read, not transposing letters and things of that nature. One of the things that I've been talking about, though, is as a classical educator, we have a stronger argument about that. And part of it is because we, as human beings, are created to appreciate beauty. We were put in a garden, there's beauty around us. And that appreciation of beauty comes out in many different ways, including beautiful writing. And I'm not suggesting that people have to become masters of calligraphy or anything like that, but to slow down and just appreciate the goodness that comes from writing and taking our time, and that efficiency isn't always the end goal in our human existence. There is just this idea of using the right word, taking the time to feel the word when you're writing it in the cursive. And so I just think it's a beautiful thing that people should take back and reevaluate and see if they want to add that to their life, which I think you should.
Yeah, I agree. Whenever someone talks about efficiency that way, I can't help but think of the Winnie the Pooh movie where, he says you gave all that up, something to the effect, you gave all that up for a fish in the sea. But he gets it wrong when he's talking about, trading in the really human parts for efficiency. And Winnie the Pooh translates that as a fish in the sea. So he's like, oh, so you gave that all up for a fish in the sea.
Yeah.
So yeah, we often trade off efficiency for some really human aspects, or
Yeah.
those things we always strive for in our humanity, but detach them from the kind of work.
Saying that, I coach Lincoln Douglas debate, which is a values based. And so on here, what we are doing is we're actually running countercultural. We're making an argument for beauty when there's a cultural value for efficiency and practicality. So it's another value base that we just have to decide what is the important value that we want to hold to.
Oh, that's really, really good. That's important. Well, thank you again for taking the time to meet with me today. And I'll make sure all of Karla's courses are in the show notes, and that you'll be able to find her courses and her article and any other pertinent information there. Thank you once again, Dr. Memmott. God bless you all.
Thank you.